First, we want to ask you this question. Have you ever noticed the weird compulsion in people, a lot of people, to pretend that they're the opposite of who they obviously are? Jussie Smollett would be one example, but it's everywhere, and it's especially prevalent in politics. It's ubiquitous in the Democratic Party. Just a few weeks ago, one Democratic politician who'd worn blackface demanded the resignation of another Democratic politician for the crime of, yes, wearing blackface. That's more than hypocrisy. It's really an escape and evasion scheme. You escape scrutiny and evade punishment by accusing other people of doing exactly what you yourself are doing, but on a much grander scale. The people calling you a thief are picking your pocket. The ones calling you an adulterer are hitting on your wife. The ones claiming you're immoral are themselves deeply worried about spending eternity in flames, and probably for good reason. It's the Bill Clinton as feminist scam. We could give you a million examples. But the living embodiment of this syndrome, the all-time Grand Prix triple gold medal winner in the category, turns out to be running for president of the United States. It's Kirsten Gillibrand, the junior senator from New York. Now, Gillibrand is interesting not because there's a chance she will become the president. She won't. Gillibrand is fascinating because she so perfectly embodies the attitudes and the vanities of the modern Democratic Party and of our ruling class more broadly. If you want to know what they're thinking in the faculty lounge at Wesleyan, or out in Silicon Valley, or in Hollywood, watch Kirsten Gillibrand. She's who they all are. Like all of them, Gillibrand rarely utters a sentence anymore without some form of moral judgment. She appears to have retired from politics, actually. She's a preacher now.
This country was founded on some basic moral principles, that we have a moral compass as a nation. Our morality as a country is literally on a knife's edge.
For me, it's really a moral question. For me, it's very much a moral question. I've been called to fight as hard as I possibly can to restore that moral integrity, that moral decency.
Moral integrity, moral decency. It would be interesting to know if Gillibrand gave that lecture to her old friend Harvey Weinstein, or to her pal, disgraced New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. Schneiderman, by the way, now stands accused of beating women and calling his Sri Lankan girlfriend a, quote, brown slave. Did she mention that to him? Did the question of moral principles ever come up during the time that Gillibrand spent with her mentor, Bill Clinton? Probably not. In fact, it's not exactly clear how Gillibrand or any of these people define the word moral. A couple of months ago, Gillibrand gave us a hint. Our future, she wrote in a tweet, is, quote, female, intersectional, powered by our belief in one another. Do you have any idea what any of that means? Gillibrand likely doesn't. No one's asked her to explain. They're afraid to ask her anything. Why? Because Gillibrand is a victim now. Bet you didn't know that she is. She's shielded from the scrutiny the rest of us received. She announced her new status as a victim just last week in a fundraising pitch. Quote, I'm already facing questions about my likability and tone, Gillibrand wrote. Sexism is already bubbling into the narrative around our campaign. But I certainly won't stop fighting for a country that values and respects women. Will you add your name to reject sexism in our political system? Get it? Kirsten Gillibrand is now oppressed. You wouldn't know that by looking. In fact, she seems like one of the most powerful people in the world. She's a U.S. senator and a presidential candidate. She went to a pricey all-girls boarding school, and then an Ivy League college, and then law school. And then she used political connections to get a prestigious legal clerkship, and then she got her Senate seat without really running for it. That all seems like a pretty high level of privilege. But no, despite a life of wealth and connections, Kirsten Gillibrand is now telling us she is oppressed. Who are her oppressors? Well, they're you and me, and anyone else who doesn't support her campaign for president. We're guilty of sexism. She's the victim of it. You won't be surprised to learn that Kirsten Gillibrand was one of the very first politicians to side with Jussie Smollett. She could empathize with another pampered rich person fighting for victimhood status. When the next hate hoax comes along, Gillibrand will probably tweet support of that too. She can't resist a fad. Wherever the political opportunities are, she is there too, in lockstep. Gillibrand once supported a balanced budget amendment. Now she backs the Green New Deal. She once bragged about keeping 2 guns under her bed. She had an A rating from the NRA. Now she wants to ban rifles. She says the NRA is not simply wrong, but evil.
The NRA has a chokehold on Congress. The NRA is concerned only with gun sales. It is literally all about money. It is all about greed. It has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. It's the power of money. It's the power of communications. It's the fear they instill in members. And it's wrong. It's morally wrong.
There it is again. It's morally wrong. The beauty of declaring something morally wrong, rather than just misguided or ineffective, is that you can't really argue with a moral absolute. You can only obey a moral absolute. And that's, of course, the point of laying it down. As a member of Congress not so long many years ago, Gillibrand said she believed in borders. She promised to crack down on sanctuary cities. She opposed awarding driver's licenses to illegal aliens. That was then. Now she wants to abolish ICE.
I don't think ICE today is working as intended.
Well, you think you should get rid of the agency?
I believe that it has become a deportation force, and I think you should separate the criminal justice from the immigration issues, and I think you should reimagine ICE. And that's why I believe you should get rid of it, start over, reimagine it, and build something that actually works.
You could see her trying to remember the talking points there. Don't get them confused. Reimagine ICE. But she got a little over her skis. It turned out that when she said that, banning ICE wasn't very popular even among Democratic voters. So Gillibrand lurched back and said she didn't really want to get rid of ICE, though as you saw, she'd proposed exactly that. But now, just a few months later, she's lurching back again. Abolishing ICE? That qualifies as centrism in the Democratic Party right now. So Gillibrand needs something more radical than that if she wants to be considered the progressive candidate. And this week she found it. Gillibrand proclaimed that border security is immoral because it impedes the movement of indigenous peoples into our country, which apparently is really their country. Watch.
On immigration, I mean, there's a crisis going on at the border right now.
What's inhumane? We need to have proper asylum. This president doesn't believe in asylum. He's afraid of immigrants. He's afraid of refugees.
And I just want to note that a lot of these people are indigenous to this land, and that border is cutting them off.
I know, that's why the wall is so absurd and hurtful.
Just who are these indigenous people? Who knows? As long as they're female and intersectional, Kirsten Gillibrand believes they're our future. Jonathan Harris is a Democratic political analyst, and he joins us. Mr. Harris, thanks very much for coming on. So who are these indigenous people who we can't keep out? Are they citizens? Are they non-citizens? What does that mean?
So I think what she was referring to, and it isn't even her that said it. It was the activist that she was
But she
talking
nodded
to.
and said that's why walls are so hurtful.
Yeah, I mean, I think she was kind of nodding before. I'm not sure she was necessarily agreeing, but if she was, I think what she's referring to is that I think it was like in the mid-1800s, for example, in Texas, that was an independent nation, and it was shared by European settlers as well as Mexican settlers. So they were sharing land together, and then Europeans kind of forced Mexicans out, and then that was duplicated again in California and so on and so forth. So I think what she's talking about is the reality that a lot of the people that are now outside of the country are actually descended from actual indigenous people.
Who used to live there dead?
I said descended from. So descended from.
So does that mean that if your ancestors lived in a place, you have a right to go there and use their social programs for free?
It just means that you're descended from people who are
right,
indigenous
but
people.
the woman who Gillibrand was talking to said it's wrong to put a border wall up because it would keep people who are indigenous to the region out.
Right.
And Gillibrand said that's absolutely right. That's why they're so hurtful. And so what they're saying is that if your ancestors lived in a place that you have, by definition, genetic citizenship or something there, is that true, do you think? Or is that insane?
Well, I mean, I don't think that's what Gillibrand was saying. I think that might have been what the activist was saying, but I don't think that's what she was agreeing with, because what she said right after that is going back to her talking points. We need to have asylum. We need to have the wall is immoral, things like that. So I don't know that she necessarily agrees with that.
Because, but that is an argument.
But that is a factual statement. I mean,
what's a factual statement that populations have moved around the globe for like thousands of years. Right. But as long as we're saying that if your ancestors, I guess if you take a DNA test or something.
But I mean, that works, right? Because if I have a child or you have a child outside of the U.S., they're still considered American citizens based on.
That's because you are a citizen.
Right.
So citizenship is not a genetic category. Because this isn't, and despite what people say, an inherently racist nation. As soon as you decide that genes are what give you claim to living here,
no, and I don't.
Then that's a different thing.
I reiterate, I don't think that's what Gillibrand was agreeing to. I think she was just agreeing to the fact that many of those people, had they not been pushed out or had they not been robbed of their land, the people that are there now are descendants of those people.
Well, I doubt that Gillibrand knows anything about the history of the region or really anything else, actually. She said recently that the 14th Amendment gave women the right to vote. So, I mean, let's not overstate her knowledge. But
I could go down a laundry list of things Trump has said.
Sure, and I'm not here to defend the ignorance of politicians. I'm merely saying I doubt she knows much about the history of that region. But I just think it's important to establish a principle. If you're a citizen, you have a right to be here, and if you're not, you don't.
Agreed, of course.
Okay,
of course.
Gillibrand doesn't agree with that. So what do you make, just more broadly, of her new posture as a victim, someone who grew up this privileged life is now telling us that she's a victim of sexism?
I don't think she's. See, I think the right
said
does
that.
Well, I think the right does that a lot. I think the right mounted this horse in the 80s of the moral majority, and everything was a moral issue. People couldn't get married. People couldn't do these things in their private lives.
No.
No, the right did that. That was
Let
their
me just be clear. I'm an Episcopalian. I'm not here to lecture you about your moral failings.
Right, but
at
the
all.
GOP
Maybe, whatever. But I'm just saying right now,
but
Gillibrand is saying this is one of the most powerful people in the world, just like Jussie Smollett. Rich person.
But see, there's no correlation.
And they're both, well, sure. I mean,
there's no correlation.
There is this trend of powerful people claiming that they're victims.
I think there's a difference.
And the people oppressing them are poorer and less popular than they are.
No, I think there's a difference between highlighting something you may be the victim of, right? Like Hillary Clinton had a very different road than Donald Trump, and a lot of it tied into sexism. She's not calling herself a victim.
Yeah,
she's just saying, no, she's not. She's just saying, this is what I had to deal with. Can you say that without being can you highlight your own struggle without calling yourself? Is that even possible?
Yeah, I think you should actually be quiet about your own struggle if you're as powerful as Hillary Clinton is. I do think that. Or if you're as powerful as I am. There are a lot of things I don't like. I try not to whine about it too much because I'm successful and I don't believe in whining.
But do you understand that what they're doing when Hillary Clinton does that? Obviously, she said many times, it can't hurt me, but there are a lot of women who go through that. There are a lot of people that represents.
You know what's going on. This is powerful people pretending to be powerless because it shields them from criticism.
I don't see her as calling herself a victim. I think she's just saying, this is what I'm going through.
I hope you're right. Jonathan Harris, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Well, like most of the Democratic Party's 2020 candidates, Elizabeth Warren is running fast to position herself at the left end of the Democratic spectrum. That's a position she comfortably held for years until the party itself went insane, and that left Warren looking dangerously moderate. So yesterday, Warren unveiled a plan for a universal state-run, taxpayer-funded daycare scheme in the United States. Warren wants 12 million kids to participate in this daycare plan. That would be 60% of all children under 5 in America. In a speech shortly before revealing her plan, Warren said universal daycare, quote, is about what each of our children is entitled to, not just the children of the wealthy, just the children of the well-connected, but every one of our children is entitled to good child care. Let's take this seriously. Warren has it exactly backward. Children are not entitled to government daycare. What children are entitled to is love from their own parents. Now, Warren herself used to know this very well. 15 years ago, she wrote an entire book making that case. The book was called The Two-Income Trap, and honestly, it's excellent. And I say that as a non-liberal. It's great. In that book, Warren argues that American families have been decimated by the mass exodus of mothers into the workforce. As a result, children are less cared for. Mothers are far less happy. And thanks to wage stagnation and rising prices, families are not actually better off economically. She proves that point in that book. You should read it. Many families are worse off. And that's one of the main reasons that Americans are having fewer children than they used to. And they're having far fewer children than they say they want to have. But they have no choice. They can't afford it. The kids they produce are likely to be less successful, and our rising rates of drug addiction and suicide and joblessness attest to that fact. The American family has been crushed by the changing American economy, and nobody wants to admit it. But 15 years ago, Elizabeth Warren did admit it, and she was deeply troubled by it. Good for her. That was the old Elizabeth Warren. Now Warren wants to be president, so she's gone corporate. That's where the money is. The new Elizabeth Warren argues that the American dream is not raising your own children. The American dream is outsourcing their upbringing to government caretakers while their parents scurry back to work as good little servants of globalized market capitalism. The need for more government daycare specialists will no doubt be used to justify more immigration. And so the cycle, as you can see, is complete. The Democratic Party started by outsourcing manufacturing, you remember that. Then they outsourced farm labor and yard work. And now they've decided to outsource parenting. Raising your own kids, Elizabeth Warren is telling us, is a job Americans just won't do.